It's good to be with you guys tonight. It's been a little while. It's been a few months, I think. And I miss singing. Just love worshiping in music with you guys. And and someone later is going to say, well, you know where we are every Thursday and Sunday. Listen, tonight's message, as we continue in this Church Gone Wild, which is such a hilarious title for a series, in this series, and we look at 2 Corinthians 11, you should just know that Tim and I have, I think, on some level, been kind of geeking out about this passage. And I've been looking at it for a while now, just knowing that tonight was going to come. And I've got the luxury of time because I think I was booked for this maybe a couple months ago or so. And so while doing whatever else is going on in my life and in ministry and at work and all that, I've just kind of continued reading it, reading the chapter, reading around it, reading through 2 Corinthians, and trying to get my mind inside of Paul. And I love approaching Scripture, as if it was a real deal, because it is. And this stuff happened. There was an actual letter that was written to a church by an actual man, Paul, the apostle. It's just not, not just a character that we hear about, that we learn about. And so it's for me really exciting to kind of put myself in that place at that time, try to figure out what were the sights and sounds and smells and all that. I don't know if I could have hung with all the smells because, it would have been different back then. But just thinking about what's going on in Corinth, and I know that you've probably heard this so many times, but, I don't know that it would have looked much different than here, where we're surrounded with different voices, like I was praying, that are saying, hey, check this thing out because this is really what you need in life. And hey, check this thing out and this thing out. And if you just follow this thing or this way of life, you're going to be set. It's the same thing then. There was crazy stuff going on inside the church, outside the church, in culture. And Paul was in the midst of all of it, just declaring, this is who Jesus is. And if you just were to flip back through the pages of 2 Corinthians and then go back and flip around in 1 Corinthians and even just look at the headers, if you don't even get past the headers and just think about, which by the way, Paul didn't write the headers. He didn't start a new paragraph and say, here's the header. This is just a letter that he's pouring himself out in. And if you just were to flip through those, because of editors today, we get to do that, you could see the way this is rolling out. And so just think about if Paul was writing this letter to us, because he did, and think about the way you're receiving that in culture, in the church, and you're trying to maneuver through all of these different voices and people and teachers and all of this who are saying that they got the right thing. And Paul's he just opens up and it's beautiful and he's talking about the glory of God and he prays and he does all this stuff and he's starting to move into who we are in him and this idea of being new creations and how we've got this treasure in clay pots and just kind of roll through that and think about they're listening to this, and at the same time it's very obvious starting last week or the week before that they've got these guys who are false teachers that are saying that's not it. And I can just imagine someone standing up and reading Paul's letter and some guys in the back going, no, it's not, blah, blah, and trying to heckle the reader because they think that they've got the truth that they've been trying to share with the church, which is totally jacking them up, right? And so Paul knows he's got to get in there and set the record straight. And so we get to kind of read this. And listen, this is a funny guy. I don't know if you feel okay saying that about Paul. I feel okay about it. Tim feels okay about it. So it must be okay. He is very humorous. I found myself, sometimes this happens, that once I wake up in the morning, it's over, just get up. I found myself, I don't know when it was, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it was ago, up at 3:30, and it wasn't just because it was super early, but I was reading this again, and I just started laughing, and I'm I love to hang out with this guy and really get to know him, and you're going to see some of that come out. And so I want to just kind of step through this chapter with you and just know that it's really interesting to me that I was first going to approach it one way and then another way, and Tim and I got together, and I was like, okay, well, now I'm seeing it a little bit different. And then even after that, like one word popped out of my mind, and then I went down a different road. It's been amazing for me to spend this much time just kind of marinating in this. And so let's take a look, okay? 2 Corinthians 11, we're going to start in chapter 1, and we're going to kind of roll through a bunch here, all right? You with me? If you don't have a Bible, there's one at the end of your row. If you don't own a Bible, please take that as Koa's gift to you. I was about to say our gift, but I didn't buy those. Koa bought those. Here we go. I wish you'd bear with me in a little foolishness. And already you're like, what's he talking about? That's not nice. Do bear with me, for I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. But I'm afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, your thoughts will be led astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. For if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. Indeed, I consider that I am not in the least inferior to these super apostles. That's tongue-in-cheek. Even if I'm unskilled in speaking, I'm not so in knowledge. Indeed, in every way, we have made this plain to you in all things. Or did I commit a sin in humbling myself so that you may be exalted because I preached God's gospel to you free of charge? I robbed other churches by accepting support from them in order to serve you. And when I was with you and was in need, I didn't burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need. So I refrained and will refrain from burdening you in any way. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be silenced in the regions of Achaia. And why? Because I don't love you? God knows I do. And what I do, I will continue to do in order to undermine the claim of those who would like to claim that in their boasted mission, they work in the same terms as we do. For such men are false apostles, deceitful workmen, disguising themselves as apostles of Christ. And no wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it's no surprise if his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness. Their end will correspond to their deeds. Like he throws down the gauntlet here before we even get into some of the stuff that I was kind of cracking up about. And I want you to see what's going on. I feel like the first few verses, 1 through 6, really show us Paul's desire for the church. And he's speaking to us, okay? So as we're listening to this tonight, like accept this as a letter coming from the Holy Spirit through Paul to us, even today in 2016. What does he want? He wants to present them as a pure bride to Christ. And you see that word that popped out at me, the word betrothed in verse 2. For I feel a divine jealousy for you, since I betrothed you to one husband to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. Such an interesting word. It means engaged, but in that culture, far more significant than engagement that we know of today. Engagement today means kind of pretty sure maybe that I'm going to go through with this. Right? For the guys anyway, sorry. Is anyone engaged in here? Did I just mess that up for you? Oh yeah, you guys did. Oh, sorry. Kind of pretty sure. Think I really dig her. We're likely going to go through with this. Right? But in that day, very different from today, like the dude would show up and in a very formal way would say, I have, he'd think about it, ride up on his horse and all, not really, but he'd ride up and maybe a chariot or whatever, he'd get in, and the father would know what's about to go down, and the bride-to-be would be there, and they would take a cup together, and they would drink to this and make a covenant that says, I am going to provide for your daughter. This is what I'm offering in return for her, and would give a substantial sacrifice for the engagement. It was legit. And the lady would look at whatever that was and be like, dang, I'm valuable. Look at how valuable he thinks that I am. There's some huge correlations to what Jesus did in our lives, right? Hopefully the wheels are turning. You can't make this stuff up, by the way, right? It's rich. And then what would happen is once they drank on it and that covenant was sealed, the guy literally, like you can read historians that talk about this stuff, literally he'd be like, I'm going to go and I'm going to get our house together. I'm going to go prepare a place for you. And when Dad says that the house is ready and that I'm ready to come back for you, I'm going to come back. Now that's what Jesus said to the disciples. Look this stuff up. Like, don't just trust me. Like, you can't believe it. That's what Jesus said about us. And all of these allusions, this use of the metaphor of us being the bride of Christ. And can you imagine being that bride that as the guy goes away, she knows that's my man and I'm his woman. That's my husband. At that point, they're really considered married. It's just that the engagement is the first part of it. What happens then is a crazy big party later, because when the dude shows up, then like it gets a little bit weird, okay? Like I'm scanning. Do we have any like PG-13? Like it gets a little weird because the dude comes back and they like, they consummate the relationship. And everybody knows what's going on. He comes back and he's like, I'm back. And they're like, let's seal the deal. And everyone's like, yeah. And then, they party for a while. And the marriage is then consummated, right? And so he's coming back for you. She knows that. And now her responsibility is to be faithful. That engagement is nothing less than marriage. And so when Paul says, I betrothed you, he was the one that came to the church in Corinth and said, I want to introduce you to Jesus. He's loving. He'll sacrifice. He already has sacrificed himself in entirety for you. And as you're in that relationship, know that he's loving and he's faithful to you and he's going to provide and he's preparing a place for you and he'll be back. And now, as his bride, keep yourself pure for him. Don't listen to all the other dudes that are out there calling, because the dudes just keep calling, right? Don't listen to all of that. And Paul's saying, I've got a desire for you, church, that you remain pure for the bridegroom, pure for the groom who's coming back one day. Because you guys can just guess, like it's not a good day if the groom comes back and finds out that his bride that he has sacrificed himself for has not remained pure and faithful for him. Right? That's not a good day in that culture. That's not a good day today. He wanted that they remain faithful to their bridegroom. And he wanted to protect them from those that were leading them toward unfaithfulness. He calls out these dudes, these super apostles, talking about how easy it is to listen to those guys and basically abandon who they know to be the real Jesus and to follow after and basically accept them and just be like, yeah, I'll hang out with you, even though the Jesus that you're teaching here is not the real Jesus. And Paul's just straight with them. He's looking at what's going on, and he talks about how these guys are leading them astray from a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. And he, in verse 4, if any of these guys comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, and he goes on to talk about a different spirit, and he's basically saying, if you're following these guys that are showing up and saying they've got a different way of life than what we've taught you in pure devotion to the one true Christ, then you're just accepting them. You're just hanging out with them. And in today's terms, it's like an engaged dude just going and hanging out at the bar with all of these, I don't know. I'm at COA, right? I can just let this stuff fly. With all these cheap women that just, they just want to party. Right? I mean, that's kind of the deal. Or the dude looks at his bride-to-be and she's just going and doing the same thing. And you're just like, are you serious? Like, you know where that's going to go. And Paul knows where it's going to go. Right? He's already corrected so much of that, even in his first letter. He has this fatherly, loving heart for the church. And so while he's thinking about the way that the super apostles, and don't you love that he's just straight with that, like the super apostles? That's ridiculous. And so, he calls them out, like, I'm just as good as these dudes, but he knows that they're gonna question his motives and everything else. And starting in verse 7, like he starts talking about the purity of his motives, right? Did I commit a sin in humbling myself? He starts to go a little bit even more sarcastic. He's like, did I commit a sin by humbling myself? That I didn't make you pay my way? Which means that's what they're probably doing, fleecing the church. I didn't work for personal gain. He says in verses 7 through 9 that he didn't take any contributions from them. Like you can look at some of these guys who, just turn on the TV on some of the churchy channels, and you can just see some of the stuff going on, and dudes who are claiming that they've got to have a jet for their ministry, and some of this crazy stuff that they're calling their congregations to give so that they can get the ministry jet that they need, and the multi-million-dollar cribs that they're going to live in and do ministry in. And it's a bit sickening, right? Like you're fleecing these people by telling them that you've got the right way for them to live, manipulating their hearts because they're looking for truth. And Paul's saying, man, I didn't even ask you guys for any of this. He worked out of love for them. It showed in verse 11, because his love got questioned. You see that. He says, and why? Because I don't love you? And so there were people that had to have been saying, that dude doesn't even love you. And he's like, God, of course, knows that I love you. All of this is out of love for you, that I want to see you remain pure for Jesus, that I want to see you remember your groom who's coming back. Like, stop allowing yourself to get to a place where you don't even remember who he is. He's got this desire, I think, to unmask these false apostles. Just take the mask off. You hear that from Tim. You hear that from me. Like, sometimes I'm slow to call these dudes out, but, I don't know that we should be. I don't know. In situations where you know that people are being led astray to a false Jesus, we just got to stand up for the love of the church, for the love of you guys. And we got to say, turn the channel when that dude comes on. Because he might want to get a laugh, but he's not going to lead you to Jesus. Remember your bride. Remember your groom. Remember who he is. Remember how he's impacted your life. Remember the sacrifice that he's made. And we want to rip off the masks from the guys that it's all about just, all about the explosive blessing you get in your life when you act a certain way and when you live a certain way. But it's not about Jesus. Like that false gospel is about you. We just want to take that mask off the way Paul does. And so he goes on, and as Tim and I were talking, it feels like it's going in this direction of, have you guys seen Babylon Bee on Facebook? Has anyone seen that? Yeah, so you guys got to check that out, Babylon Bee. So what happens is there's somebody out there, or some people out there that are writing these articles that are, super sarcastic about things that go on in the church that, like there was one about Joel can actually fly now, and, worship leader got arrested for not playing Oceans at a service, and, some things like that. Christian satire, and it's interesting because it almost feels like that's where Paul's going, because he starts he starts sort of this rant that you see in verse 16. He's like, I repeat, let no one think me foolish, but even if you do, accept me as a fool, so that I too may boast for a little while. What I'm saying with this boastful confidence, I say not with the Lord's authority, but as a fool, since many boast according to the flesh, I too will boast. For you gladly bear with fools. I love that. You're gladly hanging out with fools already, even though you think you're so wise. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you, or devours you, or takes advantage of you, or puts on airs, or strikes you in the face. To my shame, I must say, we were too weak for that. That's what I was laughing about that morning at 3:30. Maybe it was the time. I don't think so though. Because look at what he's saying. Like all of these guys who you're hanging out with, like you don't even think a second thought about hanging out with them and tolerating the message that they're giving you. Obviously, they were a bit tyrannical. For you bear it if someone makes slaves of you. That's pretty harsh. Or if they devour you or take advantage of you or act like there's something more than they're not or strikes you in the face, I guess we were just too weak for that. And so he kind of moves into this sort of satire, and it just puts the spotlight on the problem that's among them. But what he starts to roll out is this evidence of his dedication to Christ's mission, not his own. Because those guys were on their own mission. Right? They were looking to have control over the church. They were looking to have some kind of power. They were looking to build, you can assume, some sort of wealth because they were taking money from the church. Otherwise, Paul wouldn't have brought up him and his ministry in contrast. But listen to the evidence, and what he's actually rolling out here is this train of thought that if these guys are saying that I don't love you, God knows, of course, that I love you, and that my mission is not legitimate, then why would I go through everything that I'm going through for your sake and his glory? And listen to what he says. But whatever anyone else dares to boast of, I'm speaking as a fool here. Get ready to hang with me. I also dare to boast of that. Sure, let's go. You want to go? Let's go. Are they Hebrews? Check. So am I. Are they Israelites? Yep, check. So am I. Are they offspring of Abraham? Check. So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman. Can't you see him? I'm a madman. Sorry. But I think that's where he was. With far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, often near death. He's getting serious. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers. I think the laughter would have subsided. In toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who's weak and I'm not weak? Who's made to fall and I'm not indignant? Meaning he feels the pains, the struggles, the hurts, and the joys of the church. If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, he who is blessed forever, knows that I'm not lying. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. He goes on to talk about this thorn that he's been given in the flesh. We don't know exactly what that is, but in verse 7 of chapter 12, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations that he'd been given, he talks about those in the verses prior, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, so he's dealing with that, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Now, just think about, I don't know if we've got a slide with all of that stuff that I just read about what happened to him. Do we have that? It's really amazing to look at all this stuff together in one place, like this list of the stuff that he went through. And as you think about why is it that he would have gone through this, and then sort of interpret it as his dedication to the mission of Jesus in the power of the Spirit that had been given him, it's unreal. It's unreal. And he's saying, you're giving this authority to all these guys around you, and you're questioning my motivation. You're questioning the very gospel that we brought you. Look at everything that me and the people with me have been going through because we believe so much in this Jesus. There's a lot. I don't know if we'll get it up there, and that's okay if we don't, but just look through that passage, 16 through 33, and just think about the reality of the depth of the suffering that Paul willingly walked into for the bride, so that they would know Jesus, so that they would remember the reality of who he is, that they're not just waiting for some distant thoughts to change their lives, that this was a real man that lived and died for them and rose from the grave and promised that while he's giving them life and sharing his very Spirit with them, that he'll one day come back giving them hope, confident expectation of way better things to come in spite of everything that they were going through. And he's pleading with them, keep your eyes on him. And so why go through all of this? Don't you sometimes wonder that? And I think that church would have been wondering that the same way some of us wonder it when we're pressed. Why go through this? Wouldn't it be easier just to sit down? Wouldn't it just be easier to, back to the thought about the bar, wouldn't it just be easier to go to the bar and hang out with the whoever? But why go through it all? In 12, 9, and 10, that's what he tells us. 12, 9, and 10. Did you hear it whenever I was reading it? My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And so he says, because of that, I'm going to boast as much as I possibly can in my weakness, because it's all about the power of Jesus. He knows exactly who this Jesus is that he's preaching. Exactly. He knows that he's real. And last night I was with a bunch of students over in West County, and we were talking about the difference between knowing and knowing. That's a huge difference. Like, yes, I do know. I have a very strong grip on theology. And I can tell you all of the, and we go on intellectually, but we don't know. And sometimes you see that press, that when life gets you here, right? Like at that point, you're thinking, where is my faith? Where is Jesus in the midst of this? And Paul's saying that I know in the midst of every one of those situations that I just gave you. And by the way, I don't know if I could have survived one of those situations. 5 times? He's whipped 39 times. Each one of those 5 separate occasions, he's lashed the way Jesus was. Right up to the point of death. He's beaten with rods. Like, don't you think in the midst of that we'd be crying out, like, where are you, God? Listen, Paul's faith is so strong. And he knows this Jesus is real. He's fixed on him. The power that he has, the provision that he offers, the love that he offers, the fact that he's paid the debt long before we could have even thought about needing payment for debt. That he's chosen us to be his sons and his daughters. He knows, and his life was radically changed by Jesus. Think about the direction Paul was going when he was headed to Damascus. I mean, we don't know exactly if he personally killed Christians or if he just stood by and watched as that happened. But he was taking them to jail. He was offering them up to the people who would kill them. And Jesus shows up, bam, and changes his life. Changes his life. Interrupts every plan that Paul had. And as we see Paul growing. Like there was a period of about 3 years after Damascus Road where Paul was learning and growing before he went and hung out in Jerusalem. What a crazy trip that would have been. But during that time, like there's no way around seeing that Paul comes face to face with the love of the Father. And we've got these 3 statements that we looked at not long ago that I'd seen for the first time. And I've really been wrestling with these things, that Paul knew he is loved by the Father. And he wanted the church to know that reality, that that's the true gospel. It's not about their performance. It's not about them living in a certain way that these false teachers would try to take them down that road and say, you need to basically put the chains back on. Freedom is not a reality. The Father is only happy with us when we're following all the rules. We sing that song that says, that he conquered death by death. Come awake, right? Isn't that what it is? Come awake, come and rise up from the grave. Like the reality is, when we are spiritually transformed, we come out of the grave. We now have life, but these super apostles were actually ushering people back in the grave. Saying, go back in there, because when you were entombed in the darkness before Jesus, that's really where life was. And it sounds idiotic, but we do that all the time. We give in to sin, we give in to temptation, and we put the chains back on, even though as we release our hands, they fall back off. And it's like we pick them up and we put them back on, when in fact Jesus says, let's get rid of the chains. I've taken them off you. They can't be locked again. And the love of the Father, we start to experience that in a way that we never knew possible. That no matter what we do, no matter what we don't do, his love for us persists. Like, what's that like? Consumed with Jesus is the second phrase that we saw kind of roll out in some of the Soma stuff recently. And I've been praying about that a lot, like consumed by Jesus. What does that mean, that our life be consumed by Jesus? And you think about being betrothed. Like I remember whenever I was dating Vicky, we knew each other 2 weeks, and I was like, she's the one. I bought a ring in 2 weeks. Yeah, wow. Don't do that, Ben. Like, take your time. But, I knew. And my mind was just like filled with Vicky. And she's not here to verify this, but I'm sure her mind was filled with Michael. And you just couldn't stop thinking about wanting to be with that person. And when you weren't with her, I was remembering everything about her. I would read the notes, because you know how it is, like in the beginning, like it should be that way all the time, we know. But it's not. Like reality sets in and we become pathetic. But like in the beginning, you're like poring over every little word, and you're, oh my goodness, she loves me so much. And you're just like, you're captivated. You're consumed with that. Think about what it would be like if we were consumed with the reality of Jesus. I pray for that. Because man, I wander, like I'm in, and then I'm like wandering, and then I'm like consumed with him, and then I'm like, oh, shiny things. And Paul's trying to remind them of who Jesus is, so that they would capture that again. I think it's interesting in the Revelation when John's writing these letters that Jesus is basically speaking to the churches, and he addresses the church at Ephesus. He says, you've forgotten your first love. That's what you see here. You forgot him, and you instead engaged something else and became unfaithful. And the third one is dependent on the Spirit. Like, don't you see that in Paul? Like, he's marching in a direction, and he has a vision. The man of Macedonia, come over here, and he's like, done, let's go. And he's just following the Spirit's direction in his life, but it's not just about the next step and the next step and the next step, and tell me where I'm supposed to go to school, and tell me where I'm supposed to work, and who I'm supposed to marry, and where I'm supposed to live, and all of that stuff. Like we're trying to find a roadmap with the Spirit. Like it's also relying on him to remind us who Jesus is, to remind us in the everyday stuff, which Josh is right. Like You probably can't tell. I'm tired too, right? Like we get tired from life, but it's in all of those everyday like grind, the minutia where we're pressing into the Spirit and we're saying, please just remind me of the beauty of Jesus. Please just remind me of the majesty of the star-breathing God. Please just remind me of the fact that I'm loved. Please just remind me of the things that Jesus taught us. That's his role as helper and counselor and reminder. And Paul's just so focused on the Spirit that he's like, whatever it is that you want to lead me into for your sake, like, let's go. And you see that by the evidence of what he's willing to suffer. Like, if we're the church listening to that, man, don't we have to like press in and like, you did all of that so that you could be there writing me this letter, and we listen to what he's got to say. And for me, it points my eyes back to Jesus, and I look at the encouragement from Paul, who's walking through all of this, and he tells us that he's learned to have contentment in all circumstances, if he's got a ton and if he's got nothing, because it's about Christ who strengthens him in the midst of all of this. He's got this deep desire that the church would see the profound, isn't it profound, the profound beauty of Jesus and remain faithful.